The other day, Friday as I recall, Cassidy asked a very good question. And her question was, what is factoring good for? And I said, we'll answer that in a couple days. Well, that's today. So today we're going to look at one of the things factoring is used for. Factoring is actually used for a lot of things. But what we're going to use it for in this class is solving polynomial equations, whatever that means. But before we do that, I have to demonstrate my amazing psychic abilities to you. I bet you didn't know I was psychic, did you? All right, so you're going to pick two numbers. Any two numbers in the whole wide world, and I'm going to tell you one of the numbers you picked. Okay, so here's the rule. Pick any two numbers in the whole wide world, and when you multiply them together, you get 0.
That's not fair.
So you're saying I'm not really psychic?
Not really.
Not really, why not?
One of them had to be
One
zero.
was 0.
One of them had to be 0, right? So everybody picked 0. So I was right though, wasn't I? All right, that actually has a name. That's called the zero multiplication property. Yeah, see, people are never too amazed at my psychic abilities after all. The zero multiplication property says if you multiply two things together and you get the answer 0, what has to happen?
It's got to be 0.
Which one?
Oh.
Both of them have to be 0?
Oh, no, one, but I thought you meant the and.
One of them has to be 0. Does it matter which one is 0? No. Then A equals 0 or B equals 0. Of course, they both could be 0. We would accept that too, because 0 times 0 is still 0. Okay, so that's called the zero multiplication property. And that is actually going to be the whole key to solving polynomial equations. All right, well, what do I mean? What's a polynomial equation?
More than one number with an x with a variable or something.
Okay, so it's a polynomial. What you're trying to describe a polynomial, and it's got to be an equation, so it's got to have a
Equal sign.
equal. So here's an example of a polynomial equation. X squared minus x minus 30 equals 0. Why is that a polynomial equation and not a linear equation?
Because it's an exponent.
Because it's got an x squared. If it didn't have an x squared, if it was just that, then we would call it a linear equation. Okay, this is not a linear equation. Here's what you're going to do when you see a polynomial equation. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to write the equation so that it has 0 on one side.
Which it has.
This one's already done. It already has 0 on one side. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to factor. So you're going to take x squared minus x minus 30 and you're going to factor it.
X minus 6x plus 5.
X minus 6, x plus 5. Now, notice what I have. What do I have now? I have two things. These two things are being multiplied together, and I'm getting an answer of 0. What has to happen if two things are multiplied together and the answer is 0? Which one? Either one. So either x minus 6 has to be the number 0, or x plus 5 has to be the number 0. So how many answers are we going to get?
2.
We're going to end up with 2 answers, aren't we? The two answers are x is 6 or x is negative 5. Questions on that?
That's the correct answer.
That's the correct answer. Correct answers. There's 2 of them. Other questions? All right, let me give you another one. How about x squared plus 4x equals I should have copied them out of a book here instead of trying to do it in my head. We'll go with 12, I think will work. How would you solve that equation?
Subtract 12.
Absolutely. Why do you subtract the 12 first?
1 to 0.
You've got to have 0 on one side. Why do you have to have 0 on one side?
For this to work.
For this to work. All right, so I'm not going to subtract the 12. I'm going to do it wrong the first time. So this is wrong. Can you factor the left-hand side?
Yeah.
You take an X out.
Yes, you can take an X out. There's a GCF, isn't there? I can take an X out. X times X plus 4 equals 12. Actually, I haven't done anything wrong. I just haven't done anything helpful. Why is that not helpful?
So you put that back in, is going to be the same thing?
Not really. My question is, I'm multiplying two things together. Correct? And I'm getting the answer 12. How can I multiply two things together and have the answer to be 12? One could be 12 and one could be 1. One could be 2 and 6. They could be 3 and 4. Which one's the right one? We don't know. That's the problem. That's why we absolutely positively need 0 over there. 0 is the special number that if I'm multiplying two things together and I'm getting 0, the only choice is I have to have 0. We'll make it work. Okay, so that's a very common mistake people will make. In fact, I'll see people write x times x plus 4 equals 12, and then they'll write x equals 12, x plus 4 equals 12. That's even more wrong. How come? Well, if these are both 12, what's 12 times 12? It's certainly not 12 again, is it? So that's even more wrong. All right, so we're not going to do that.
With that equation with just x equals 2, have that out.
I think x equals 2 is a correct answer, because if I plug 2 in, 2 squared is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, 4 plus 8 is 12. 2 is the right answer. But you're missing something. What are you missing? The other answer. All right, so the moral of the story is if we have an x squared, how many answers are we going to get? Usually you're going to get 2. So you found one of the right answers by trial and error, by guessing. That's good, but you didn't find them both. All right, so the correct thing to do is get 0 on one side. So I subtract 12. X squared plus 4x minus 12 equals 0. Now I want to factor. Can I factor x squared plus 4x minus 12? Yes, the factors as x plus 6 and x minus 2 is 0. Then what?
You break them apart and make them both equal to
You
0.
break them apart and make them both equal to 0. That's our 0 multiplication property. I'm multiplying two things together. I'm getting an answer of 0. The only way that can happen is that one has to be 0 or that one has to be 0. So here's the second answer. X equals negative 6 was the one you were missing. Or x equals 2 was the one you had. You look like you have a question.
Why'd you put?
Well, because you switched them because you want for positive 12, not negative 12, right? Is that why you switched the signs around?
Here's the negative.
Oh, show him the...
Well, I really switched the signs around because to get the x all by itself, I had to add 2 on both sides.
Yeah.
And then to get this x all by itself, I had to subtract 6 on both sides. Is that what you mean? No?
I don't know. I'm still confused. I thought it was 6 and
Yeah,
negative
that's what I thought. So after we factor it and get the x plus 6 and then the x minus 2, we have to...
2. Make it equal to 0.
X plus 6 equals 0. How do you get the x all by itself?
Right, subtract 6 over. Okay.
That's why the sign switches. That's why you get x equals negative
So we write
6.
the factor as an equation and then...
Correct. You write the factors as an equation, nice little linear equations,
Right.
and then you solve each
And
one.
then whatever you get is your answer.
Whatever you get is your answer. Yes. Better? Other questions? find some in the book here so I don't have to make up problems. How about 6m squared minus 11m plus 3 is 0. Well, step number 1, we get 0 on one side.
Already.
That's easy. That's already done. Step number 2 is factor. This is where it's hard.
There's no miles.
Don't you multiply that and then the first
You're gonna
one?
have
Correct. So Michael's correct. There's no GCF. And then Carrie's correct. We see 3 pieces. And we see that this first number is not the number 1. So when this first number is not the number 1, we multiply the ends. We take 6 times 3. 6 times 3 is 18. Can I factor the number 18 to make my 2 factors add up to the negative 11 that I have in the middle? Negative 2 and negative 9. I'm going to come back up to my problem. I'm going to write 6m squared, but I'm not going to write negative 11m. What am I going to write? Negative 2m minus 9m, and then I still have the plus 3 equals 0.
Wait, so how do you know when to do that?
How do you know when to do that? When you have 3 pieces, and this first number is not the number 1.
And there's no GCF.
And there's no GCF. We always try the GCF first.
If that first number was a 6, but then the 11 was a 12, you would have
Right.
GCF.
If the 6 factored out altogether, then we wouldn't have to worry about this. If 6 were the GCF and we could factor it out, this would be a much easier problem. Unfortunately, I picked a harder one. Because you're going to have to do harder ones, as you imagine. Okay, so the goal is, when this is not the number 1 right here, we want to make this so that it has 4 pieces. And why do we want 4 pieces? Because we group. What's common in the first group? 2m. And left over, 3m minus 1. Excellent. Second group, negative 3. And we do a negative, since this is a negative here, we factor out a negative, so we take out negative 3. And then we got to remember to be careful about our signs. It better be 3m minus 1. How come it better be 3m minus 1?
So it has to be the same.
Because those things have to be the same.
You can put it together.
So I can put it together. All right, so 3m minus 1 is now my common thing. I write that down. And then left over is
2m minus
2m minus 3. All right, there's the hard part. The hard part is doing that factoring.
You know what problem I had? When we put the 2m out front,
Mhm.
I took the negative with it. I
Yep,
considered that as one piece.
right.
See that?
In the way you usually look at it, this first one is positive,
Yeah,
so you're going to take out a positive here. On the second group, this first one is negative,
yeah.
so we're going to take out the negative. So the sign is always determined by the first piece. If this first one is positive, it's a positive. If this first one is negative, it's a negative. Okay. All right, so like I said, we did the hard work. The hard work is all that factoring. What's the easy work? Set them both to 0. Okay, so I'm going to get 2 little equations now. 3m minus 1 equals 0, or 2m minus 3 equals 0. And at this point, you should always have linear equations. Why would we call those linear now?
because there's no
There's no exponents, those are linear. How do you solve the first one? Add 1 to both sides. 3m is 1, and then divide. Back to fractions. M is 1/3. But the good news is we didn't have to add, subtract, multiply, divide any fractions. We just ended up with our answer being a fraction. That's not such a bad thing. I think we're going to get a fraction here too, because we're going to add the 3. 2m is 3. We're going to divide by that 2. M is 3/2. So yes, absolutely, your answers might end up being fractions. That can absolutely happen.
That's like half the paper.
Yes, I agree. When you have to factor, and this first number is not the number one, factoring is difficult.
That's fun.
I agree. Math is fun. I agree with math is fun. Also.
It's fun when you get it and you get going and you're understanding, but it takes me a while.
Takes a while, I
Once I
agree.
get it, I'm off.
Well, even more fun.
Fractions.
You scoot that thing.
What if your problem has fractions right from the very beginning?
LCD, right?
Common denominator.
Cancel.
We're going to cancel them. That's exactly right. Just like we did for linear equations, we're going to cancel all those fractions. So what would you do to cancel all those fractions? Multiply everything by 3 would work great. I'm going to multiply by negative 3. Why this time would I pick negative 3?
There was that
It is
negative.
negative.
I like the first one to always be positive. I find that to be much, much easier. So while multiplying by 3 would work, I think it's better in this case to multiply by negative 3 to also get rid of the minus sign. Alright, so I'm going to take everything in this equation and I'm going to multiply it by negative 3 to make all those nasty little fractions go away. What's negative 1/3 times negative 3?
X squared.
Just positive 1, isn't it? The two negatives cancel out. So it's just x squared left over. And then what's a positive 1/3 times a negative 3?
1.
Negative 1. One's positive and one's negative. So it's going to be negative x. And then minus 30 equals negative 18. So, don't let the fractions freak you out. Just like we did with linear equations. When we start with fractions, we're going to find our common denominator, we're going to multiply, and we're going to make all the fractions go away.
Now sometimes I tried to do everything, like I messed up and I tried to multiply everything by the denominator. But I messed up and they said at the lab, oh, you have to multiply the top and the bottom at the same time. I don't know when that was, when I messed up. That was a problem where you had to do both, top and bottom.
If you're multiplying by a fraction, then you multiply tops, multiply bottoms. Maybe that's what they were talking about?
No, it might have been adding and subtracting. Maybe I'm confusing it.
Could be. Adding and subtracting, of course, you got to have a common denominator to add or subtract. All right, anyway. What do we do now that we've gotten rid of the fractions?
Sure.
Factor.
Get rid of 18.
No, we don't factor yet.
Add 18.
Add 18. Why do we add 18 first?
0.
You got to have the 0 on one side. So before you jump to factoring, you got to get a 0. So we add the 18. X squared minus x minus 12 is 0. Can you factor x squared minus x minus 12? Seeing some yeses. If so, how?
X minus 4x plus 2.
X minus 4 and x plus 3. That's correct. Those multiply to be a negative 12, and they do add up to be a negative 1. We have x minus 4 equals 0, or x plus 3 equals 0. Solve the first one. X is 4. Solve the second one. Negative 3. So, I hope you will agree that having those fractions there wasn't the end of the world. You get rid of them, from there the problem was actually much easier than that one was, I think. So even though we started with fractions, I think the problem with fractions was easier. That's unusual. Usually fractions make things hard. In this case, they weren't so bad. Questions on that? All right, a couple more problems. X squared equals 9.
Minus 3.
Subtract 9. And then it factors as x minus 3 and x plus 3. And what's that? Right, because you have x minus 3 equals 0, x plus 3 equals 0, you get x is 3, x is negative 3. An awful lot of people, they'll see x squared equals 9, and they'll write x equals 3. And I'm going to take off lots of points. How come?
Well, really, doesn't x actually equal 3?
No. X could be the number 3.
But like,
But it could be negative.
It could be negative 3 also. Because negative 3 times negative 3 gives 9.
Well, plus up is always 2.
When you have equations that have x squared, you're almost always going to get 2 answers. It's going to be very, very rare that you don't get 2 answers. I'll give you an example here in just a second. You're almost always going to get 2.
no, I was just thinking to myself.
So basically with these, we always start with either adding or subtracting the answer.
You
get
got to get 0 on one side.
You get going.
Yep.
Okay.
If you don't have 0 on one side, your first step should be get 0 on one side. Absolutely.
Now, in the case with the fraction, we didn't do it that way. We did it multiply by 3 first.
Yeah, well, we decided to get rid of the fraction first.
Okay.
It would probably, if I were doing this
It
by
would have been harder to do that, right?
well, no. Somebody told me clear the fractions. If I were doing it on my own, I probably would have subtracted the 6 first and got 0 on the one side. But then I would have said, hey, I don't like these fractions, and I would have multiplied by negative 3, and I would have ended up right here at x squared minus x minus 12 equals 0. So the order that we did those didn't matter. But absolutely, before you can factor, you've got to have the 0. No way around that. Anyway, like I say, I almost guarantee that on our next test, if I give this problem, somebody in the room will write x equals 3, and that'll be all they'll give me. And you should remember that when you have an x squared, how many answers do you get? 2. Usually. Let me give you an example of not always. How about x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals 0? Do we have 0 on one side?
Yeah.
Yes, that's a good thing. Can you factor x squared minus 4x plus 4? Yes.
Negative 2, negative 2.
You get x minus 2 times x minus 2 equals 0. So you get 2 answers, but it's really the same number 2 times, isn't it? Because you have x minus 2 equals 0, x minus 2 equals 0, you get the same answer twice. So that can happen. So typically, especially if you're doing your homework on MyLab, you would only write one answer. You would write x equals 2. So it can happen that you only get one answer, but the only way that happens is this, where you get the exact same number twice. Questions on that? Okay. How about this one? X cubed plus 5x squared minus 4x minus 20 equals 0.
Group it.
Absolutely, you're going to group it. But let me ask you a question before we do that. How many answers?
3?
3. Why do you think there's 3 answers?
It's cubed.
Because it's cubed. So it's very easy to tell how many answers there's supposed to be. If your biggest power is an x squared, you should get 2 answers. If your biggest power is an x cubed, you should get 3 answers. If you had an x to the 12, you would expect to get 12 answers. That will never happen in this class, but that's what you would expect. Okay, pretty simple. But you're absolutely right. We have 0 on one side. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces, so we factor by grouping. What do you like in the first group? Or more importantly, what's common in the first group? X squared. Left over? X plus 5. Second group? Negative 4. Very good. Since this is a minus, we're going to do a minus 4. Watching your signs very carefully. X plus 5. We're happy. The x plus 5s match perfectly. I write down the x plus 5. Take away the x plus 5. What's left over? X squared minus 4. Excellent. And then we factor again. X squared minus 4 factors. Why does x squared minus 4 factor? It's perfect squares. It factors as x plus 2 and x minus 2. So we're going to have x plus 5 times x plus 2 times x minus 2 equals 0. And really, this is just an extension of the zero multiplication property. If I asked you to pick 3 numbers and multiply them together and get the answer 0, what would have to happen? One of those numbers would have to be 0. Do we care which one? Not at all. So we're going to get 3 answers. We're going to have x plus 5 equals 0, x plus 2 equals 0, x minus 2 equals 0. We're going to solve them all. We get x is negative 2 for that one. I got them written in a different order than you do. And you do get x equals 2 on the end there. We started with an x cubed. We got 3 answers. That's what we expected.
It was on a test, and we didn't put the x plus 5 equals 0 first, we just put the x equals negative 5. Is that still okay?
Yes. After you've done these for a while, it's fine with me if you skip from here directly to there. I would just say be careful, because I see a lot of people have x plus 5 and then they skip and they write x equals 5. So just be careful if you're going to skip that step. Make sure you recognize it. You got to move the 5 to the other side so it turns out to be negative. Okay? Other questions? All right. Let's see. Yeah, I saw some good ones in here. Where did the good one go? X plus 3. Times x minus 2 equals 24. What do you think of that one? You gotta get the 24 on the one side, okay. That would be x plus 3 times x minus 2 minus 24 equals 0. Can you factor? Right, and that's exactly what I think you're going to have to do. Before you can factor, I think you're going to have to expand this, combine the 24, and then try to factor it. So I think you got to multiply these out. When you multiply this out, this is x squared minus 2x plus 3x minus 6 minus 24 equals 0. And then I think you have to combine all your like terms. Combine like terms, I get x squared plus x minus 30 is 0. So I've got to rewrite it and write it in the form that we normally use for factoring, and there it is. Michael.
How did we go through how you got the x squared minus 2x plus 3x?
Sure. I did. What's wrong with my pen here? I took x times x, that gave me the x squared, and then I took the x times the negative 2. I'm just doing FOIL, that's exactly right. And then the 3x and the negative 6. Can we factor x squared plus x minus 30? Yes. How do we factor x squared plus x minus 30? X plus 6 and x minus 5? So x equals negative 6 and x equals 5, going on your idea of just skipping the last steps there. Questions on that? Hadn't done one like that yet. How about, I'll just steal that one that I had. 4x cubed plus 12x squared minus 160x is 0.
Easy enough.
Easy enough? Great.
How's a GCF?
It has a GCF. I agree completely. What's your GCF? 4x. Okay, so I take a 4x out. What's left over?
X squared plus 3 minus 40.
X squared plus 3x minus 40. Can you do better than that? What do I mean by better than that?
Yes, negative 8, or positive 8, negative 5.
We've got three pieces, the x squared plus 3x minus 40. I think we can break that up. So we're going to have 4x times x plus 8, you told me, and x minus 5. That looks right. Okay. 4x equals 0, x plus 8 equals 0, x minus 5 is 0. What are the final answers?
X equals 0 with 4x minus 8, x plus 5.
You said x equals 0 over 4, which is correct, but I would hope you would simplify that with 0 over 4.
0.
Just 0. So the first answer is just x equals 0. The next one was x equals negative 8. And the last one was x equals 5. That can happen. Sometimes x equals 0 is a right answer. And that's okay. Don't let that I find that tends to bother students a lot. They don't like x equals 0 to be a right answer. Can be a right answer. Don't let that bother you. Questions on that one?